But yeah, thank you all for being in this space. This is the Front and Centered Transportation Briefing. Front and Centered, if you're not already familiar, is a coalition of organizations around the state of Washington that are founded by and for BIPOC and low-income communities in the state, and we do a lot of wonderful work towards a just transition. So I'm glad to be sharing this space with you all. I did want to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded, and we'll have the recording available after the meeting. Along with some of my colleagues, we'll be posting links to resources in the chat throughout the meeting. So feel free to keep an eye on that. And if you're just joining us now and you want to share your name, pronouns, and what organization or where you're coming from, feel free to do that in the chat. Throughout the meeting as well, if you have questions that arise for the speakers or just in general and you'd like to share those, feel free to put those in the chat and we'll try to keep track of them, and I'll hop in and see where I can ask those as they come up. And if not, we will try to follow up after the meeting as well so that folks get the information they want. Today, the agenda is looking like I will be passing it to Paulo Nunes-Ueno, who is our Transportation and Land Use Program Lead at Front and Centered, along with our speakers, Pastor Willoughby, and potentially some others at the end, which we're so excited from. So yeah, before I will pass it off to Paulo, my name is Sierra Suafo McLean. I know I didn't say it at the beginning. I'm the Program Engagement Lead with Front and Centered, but yeah, I'm so excited to be here today. So I'll pass it to Paulo.
Thanks so much, Sierra. We're so excited to share our transportation justice agenda with all of you. And with me, there's Pastor Willoughby from Eastside Baptist Church in Tacoma, and hopefully Vanessa Pruitt from Kennewick, who is a member of the BMAC, the BIPOC Mobility Action Coalition, although having some audio difficulties there. But maybe we'll be able to resolve that and then get her on. So today I'm going to share with you a really exciting new tool that we're launching today. So this is the first time anybody's seen it, that is meant to help advocates and other community leaders really understand the level of transit that is available in their community. So this is statewide. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. And then the second thing I'll do is to share our transportation justice agenda, the community priorities for transportation justice. And then finally, I'm going to hand it to Pastor Willoughby so that he can tell us about the really amazing work that they're doing on Portland Avenue in Tacoma, and hopefully hear from Vanessa in her campaign to make sure that Benton Franklin Transit doesn't cut their transit routes. So I'm gonna go here and share my screen, and then hopefully you all will be able to see this. And Pastor Willoughby, can you be my checker and see, can you see that screen?
Currently unmuted. Alt press A button.
Yes, sir. Sir, I can.
Speak on demand.
Okay, and there we go. We want to make sure that Vanessa is muted. Let's see. So what we see here is the Washington Transit Access Map. This has information for every transit agency across the state. And one of the really neat things that it does is it allows you to compare. But first of all, let's start with Seattle. So we're going to just type in Seattle, and I'm going to figure out how to hide that. You all can see this, and it's annoying, right? So I'm going to say hide floating meeting controls. Okay. So here we see these are all the frequent transit routes in the city of Seattle. And I'm going to zoom out so that you can see more. And what you
currently unmuted. Alt press A button.
The controls that you have here in the bottom let you show routes that run less often, and they're color coded by least frequent to most frequent. And what we're seeing here is rush hour. And we're going to go up here and compare Seattle to Tacoma, for example. And what we get next here is side by side. Here we have the frequent transit routes in Seattle and the frequent transit route. There's only one in the city of Tacoma. And so what we have here is we have 27 routes in Seattle and one in Tacoma. And now we're going to show you how to do a deep dive here into the demographics. Well, who has access to transit? And so I clicked here, and what we see is all of the routes. So this is a service that even runs, once or twice a day, all the way to the most frequent. And I'm going to just turn this off so that we can see that comparison side by side. And the tool then will tell us, so in Seattle, 69% of people have access to frequent transit, and that number is 4% in Tacoma. And it's 0% late night. And in Seattle, it's 42%. So I'm really excited to share this tool with all of you. There will be lots of opportunities for us to do more webinars and more trainings to so that you can really dig into it. So I want to do another comparison that I think would be really interesting. So if we look at Yakima, for example, and what Yakima shows up as is no transit. And that's because it's starting at transit that runs every 15 minutes. And if we increase this to half an hour, then we see that there is one route in Yakima that goes to Union Gap. And now when we compare, and it's not fair to compare Yakima to Seattle, but if we say to Kennewick, for example, some really interesting things come up where we see that, wow, Kennewick actually has a lot more transit than Yakima for some reason. And when we look here, what we see is that there are dense parts of Yakima. It seems like density is not really a big difference between Yakima and Kennewick. But what we see that while Yakima has 0% frequent transit access, Kennewick has 34%. And then as we scroll down, we get into some demographics. And this is broken down by ethnicity here. And some interesting things come up where even in Kennewick, there's over a quarter of people in Kennewick have access to no transit whatsoever. Even though there are quite a few people relatively speaking, that have access to frequent transit. And you can break this down by population, by education attainment, where it's broken down by folks that have less than high school or equivalent, some college or bachelor or advanced degree. You can slice this and dice this by household income and also by vehicle ownership. Now, if we go back up to the top here, you can also see some really interesting things like transit access to jobs. So what you see here is how many jobs are within the frequent transit network. And in Yakima, it's just goose eggs across the board because there is no frequent transit network. And it's actually quite a few, a big percentage of jobs in Kennewick are within a half mile of their frequent transit network. So there's other information here that I really encourage you to explore on your own. So housing and transportation cost comparisons, for example, are where you show here that in Yakima, people spend 51% of their income on housing and transportation. And in Kennewick, which presumably has similar cost of living, it's quite a bit lower, primarily because transportation is so much cheaper in Kennewick because there is transit. So I want to flip now and talk about our transportation justice agenda and how this fits in and why this is so important in terms of community priorities for how we make transportation justice actually real in the world. So,
Hey, Paulo.
yeah.
Sorry, can I pause you real quick and ask a question from the chat
Okay.
about the map? There was just a question about where the data is coming from, if it's coming from WSDOT's frequent transit service study, and if we are using the same frequency designations as in WSDOT's frequent transit study, or using different categories.
So the source data is the same, but the frequency categories are slightly different. And because these two things, Washington State Department of Transportation is developing a frequent transit study as we speak, which is really incredibly exciting. But because these were developed in parallel, their definitions are slightly different than ours. But, I think what we should do is have a standalone session on the transit access map, and we can nerd out about all kinds of data things and transit things. And I will make sure that if folks have signed up for this session, they'll get an invite for that Sierra and I will send out an invite for a follow-up session that I can do. So I'm just going to go through these really quickly, and then let's hold questions till the end, and then we can answer them all together. So this will take about 5 minutes, and then I'm really happy to be able to hand it to Pastor Willoughby. This gives context of, well, what is our transportation justice agenda? So the reality is that climate and equity are our two big challenges, and transportation has a way of magnifying these challenges and making the problem worse, or it can be one of the key tools to solve both our climate challenges and our equity challenges. So we know that transit and sidewalk are these really powerful tools for addressing both of these issues of climate and equity, but they're tools that are largely going unused. And why is that? Well, because BIPOC voices have been largely sidelined when it comes to the question of large transportation decisions and when it comes to the climate conversations. 60% of riders of transit are BIPOC or low income or have a disabilities. And honestly, our voices have been easy to ignore. So the question really is, well, how do we change that? And the front and center recipe has been be very clear in asserting rights, in showing where those rights aren't being met, and then creating policy and advocacy that demand justice. So one example of how we've done this in the past is the Washington Environmental Health Disparities Map that was created here at Front and Center and is now adopted by the Department of Health and is used in policy throughout the state. And we're really excited to have the Washington Transit Access Map join that and be a tool to develop more equity in transportation, to be a tool so that we can advocate for transit to be better throughout the state. So our transportation justice agenda has three key pillars. We want a moratorium on building highways in the most polluted communities. We want to set clear targets for creating sidewalks and transit that are missing throughout the state. And we want stable investments over years and decades to make sure that we meet these targets. So the first one, stopping highways that are built in the most polluted communities, the Move Ahead Washington bill that was passed last session had many great things in it, and yet the 12 highway projects that were funded in that package, 7 of them are in areas that have the environmental health disparities that are the highest in the state, the 10 or 9 environmental health disparity areas. So just to pick a couple of examples, here's the Puget Sound Gateway, and we have in red, the highest environmental health disparity areas, and in brown, the second highest environmental health disparity areas. And this leg of the Puget Sound Gateway project actually is not too far, right in the backyard of Pastor Willoughby's church. Here is the US 2 trestle expansion, linking directly to bringing traffic directly to an area that has the second highest environmental health disparities in the state. And here is the Columbia River crossing, also known as, with its newly rebranded name, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project, that hits some of the most polluted areas in the state. So we're calling for a moratorium on this, and that just clearly we need to stop asking the communities that have paid the highest price for our inability to move away from fossil fuels and cars and trucks to stop paying that price, and for us to figure out how to do our transportation system in a way that doesn't create more harm to these communities. So setting targets for sidewalk and transit. So with transit, frequency and spans really means freedom, the ability to live your life to its fullest, even if you can't drive, even if you can't afford to drive, or even if you're too old or too young to drive. So the question really is, well, who gets, or better yet, who deserves freedom? And that's why we created the transit access map, because what we see is that here in Washington state, we live with enormous disparities because in terms of transit, because we have made this purely a local issue, that the cities that have been able to tax themselves because they have a favorable voting population, and because they have the property values or the tax base to do it, have good transit, and the other places do not. Our number 2 city, number 2 and number 3 city have 4% and 3% frequent transit access. Imagine how much lost opportunity, how much additional pollution, how much additional cost we're burdening people with because we just don't have the transit systems that these places really should have. So what we're calling for is ensuring that 65% of Washington residents have frequent transit access by 2035, and that all transit stops have at least a half-mile radius of safe and accessible sidewalks. When we say that the citizens of Seattle, for example, or that in Tacoma, 4% of the people have access to frequent transit, we actually don't know if that's accessible using a walker or using a wheelchair, or for somebody that has mobility issues. So we really need to, number one, understand where the missing sidewalks are, and then make a really honest effort and get busy and get serious about building out the missing sidewalks. So I want to close out by saying that when we're all looking for a place to live, whether it's an apartment to rent or a house to buy, or somebody in your family is looking for a place for your family to live, did you have to ask whether that place has electricity, or whether there's running water there, or if there's a toilet? We've never had to ask any of these questions. We've never had to say, well, I'd love to live there, but there are no roads. And yet, when it comes to transit and sidewalks, we have these enormous gaps in what we're providing to the people in our state. And what I'm asking, this is slightly out of order here. So the third pillar is making real investments in solving the problem. So we're spending billions of dollars building highways, and we really need to shift much of that money to create a transportation justice account in the state budget, and identify sources of reliable long-term funding so that we can reach these targets that I just talked about. So I want to close out and then hand it over to Pastor Willoughby and hopefully to Vanessa.
Yes.
Hey, Vanessa. And ask you to imagine a future where sidewalks and transit are as common as electricity or running water or indoor toilets. We expect these things from the cities where we live in, from the places where we raise our families, and we should also be able to expect a safe street with a safe sidewalk, with a decent transit system, whether it's a bus or a train. So the transportation justice agenda is the first step in that, and there are tons of organizations like Eastside Baptist and like the BMAC and the work that Vanessa is doing that are members of Front and Centered that are doing incredible work that we want to share with you. And really importantly, we want to be able to count on your support to spread the word about the transportation justice agenda, to have you use the transit access map and really get into it and help other people learn how to use it and keep our elected officials accountable for making this better. So with that, I want to welcome Pastor Willoughby, and I'm going to stop sharing. And Pastor Willoughby, it's so great to have you join us.
Amen. Thank you, Paulo. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. Great presentation. Very informal, informational. I was just thinking, you know, in terms of the norm. So in the norm in our region is there's not always curb and gutter. So it's commonplace to see some children get to a point of going down Portland Avenue and have to step off what is the pavement and step out into traffic in order to get around an obstruction that's in front of it, which in most parts should just be curb and gutter up and down the sidewalk. And so they're having to walk great distances, put themselves in harm's way. Parents are afraid to let their children out to play in settings and sessions like that because there's just not a safe environment for people to get out and walk and play. You can't take the bus down to the park. And so it's here at Eastside that we have gotten to the place where our backs are against the wall and enough's enough. And so we're trying to, in a peaceful way, but a forceful way, to say, I know we're at the bottom of the rung. And I know environmental studies show that this isn't probably the greatest neighborhood to live in. And I know some of our test scores are probably the lowest in some of the parts of the state. But even with all that being said, there's still a humanity side of it, that if you're not willing to help people who are on the bottom have an opportunity to come up with your resources, and you keep bypassing, and then it becomes the norm in terms of being able to step off the sidewalk, and not only step off the sidewalk, but to venture out into other dainties in terms of crime and other elements that stem from the fact that you don't have the basic tenets and the basic rights of a bus that would be able to be within 10 or 15 minutes so you can walk and go to the park, or that your parents feel like it's safe enough for you to get outside and play. And this being in the holiday season, normally we'd like to see people in strollers and hats and gloves and mittens walking out towards the park. It's snowing today and making snowballs, but it's not a safe place. It's not a safe place in the environment. So a lot of times the things that you would normally see, you don't see any sleighs being pulled by families because it's just not a safe environment. So my question is always, then why not the east side of Tacoma? You know, why do we have to continue to be at the bottom of the rung, opposed to, we'll admit it, that perhaps our test scores and perhaps the water isn't as safe and perhaps all these things actually do exist. But the question is, and that our youth and that our families are shouting for, is that why can't you slow the traffic down and maybe put a park lane in and add more lighting and put curb and gutters that would influence maybe some businesses to come in and open some mom and pop stores so that we can change the environment to a place that's more family friendly. And then as we slowly creep from the bottom, maybe to the next rung, you know, through that generation. And so as we create family wealth, that a parent and a family is privileged. You say, I live on the east side of Tacoma, and this is where my parents lived, and this is where my parents' parents lived, and we've been a viable part of what's going on. And so transportation starts that for us. And so whenever we try to minister and try to do what we do, we first say, can you get here safely? Or can we send a van for you? But it would be a great help. And I want to say thank you to Front and Center, who have helped us get our story out and get our voices out, that we need to be heard and to be seen. Come and take a tour and see some of the discrepancies that we have, that if you're on a walker, you're subject to fall and hurt yourself because there's so many lumps and so many different things in the sidewalk. So sometimes I think that perhaps they can't see what's going on over here, because if they did, the heart of the average person would say, we need to fix that. Even if I don't live there, I need to make sure that someone else has I think our Constitution, that certain unalienable rights, that all men have the rights and to liberty and the pursuit of happiness. So we're just trying to pursue happiness in a way that is contingent on generational wealth and generational blessing.
Take your
And so
vitamin.
we just thank Front and Center for the opportunity to share and to be a part of this. And we want to continue to get our message out and continue to fight on
Here
our
is your
important transportation that we need to make sure that each one reach one. And so we're available to make sure that we continue to get it out and do what we need to do to make sure we have a safe environment and a healthy and a prosperous community that we're proud of. And so thank you, Paulo, for this few minutes.
Thank you, Pastor Willoughby. It's so inspiring to hear you speak. You know, the road that Pastor Willoughby is talking about, Portland Avenue in Tacoma, is the kind of road that some people call a strode. It's a street and a road. It's an arterial highway. It's 3 lanes in each direction with wide lanes that cause drivers to really speed. And it's the crossing, the pedestrian crossings are really widespread. And when we look at the data, we see that these types of roads are where 60% of pedestrian fatalities happen. And I don't think it'll surprise people at all in the call to know that, and these types of roads, the stroads, are more prevalent. You're more likely to find one in Black and brown neighborhoods, because these were streets that prioritize the speed of moving traffic and not the people that live near them, that whose churches are there. And we can do something about changing that, right? Mm-hmm. Like when Pastor Willoughby and I were with the congregation, we were looking at pictures. Well, what are other examples of ways in which people have changed these? And you know, through Rainier through Columbia City in Seattle is an example of a strode that was slowed down, just like the pastor is talking about, that we created parking, created a safe place for people to walk, and then businesses came, and that community is thriving. Why not have something like that in the east side of Tacoma as well? So I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa, and I'm really excited for you all to hear from her and the work that she's been doing in Kennewick, and also with this new organization that is forming the BIPOC Mobility Action Coalition. Vanessa, can you hear us?
Yes.
All right, we can hear you loud and clear now. Go ahead.
Thank you, Paulo. Yes, I'm Vanessa, located in Kennewick and part of the Bibic Coalition. Remember, I'm excited to be a part of that, excited to be here today among all of you. I want to talk a little bit about mobility and the importance of mobility and transportation, how it affects us all as a whole. For me, and a lot of people, mobility is a basic need with how people get to work, a place of worship, medical appointments, and grocery stores. And there are places in our community that people do not have access of transportation. And in those households, some people may have physical conditions that limit their mobility. No one should have to be faced with the option between walking to and from to the grocery store 2 or 3 miles or waiting for a bus that may take 1 or 2 hours too long. And if you don't have a vehicle, the only thing that you have to rely on is either someone giving you a ride or whatever your source of transportation is. And as for me, my source of transportation is my 2 feet, the bus. I don't know about all of you, but my bus pass is the key to my independence. Some drivers may have the option to get around in their communities. If their car breaks down, they may have a second vehicle available to drive, but non-drivers and the disabled do not have those options. It's either transit, paratransit, or nothing at all. It's not right that the people that really depend on transportation aren't getting their needs met. It's time that we invest in a better transportation system. It's time that non-drivers have better access to sidewalks so they can safely travel on. It's time for people to have the freedom to go where they want to go, when they want to go. It's time that people that live in certain areas that have no or little transportation get to where they need to go so they can maintain a productive lifestyle. It's very disappointing that there is more investment in building new highways rather than building a transportation system. It's almost like saying that non-drivers don't matter. People might say that they don't need transportation. They might say that today. But one day, their circumstances might change. They might change for someone they know or someone that they love, that they may have to rely on transportation one day. I've done a lot of transportation interviews with people, and they all said that they would appreciate the opportunity to take transit only if it was available to them. And we can improve this in these areas and make it easier by building a flexible system regardless of race, age, or income. This involves vehicles operating on flexible routes at the passenger's request. People can use the service for certain days and time by contacting the dispatcher, for scheduling their trip. I think it would be less expensive since the operating vehicles are only dispatched when passengers are picked up and dropped off at those particular destinations. There could be volunteer transit to have people drive vans, buses, or other cars to provide rides for people. This might increase flexibility at a low cost. I believe if there are more transit options, it could help the low-income communities. It could create employment opportunities. It can bring communities together by investing in a safe, pedestrian-friendly transportation system that will benefit us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Vanessa was really instrumental in making sure and organizing people in Kennewick to push back against what Benton Franklin Transit Board wanted to do, which was going to be a big reduction in transit service. And as you saw in the map, they have something to protect. There's a transit system that could be a lot better, but it serves and is, like Vanessa said, serves as freedom for a lot of people in the Tri-City area. I want to just give a heads up to folks that our transportation justice agenda, which is a document that's published today, and you can find it on our website and read more about the work that Pastor Willoughby is doing, read more about the overall transportation justice agenda. And I want to remind folks that the legislative session is just around the corner. It's starting in January, and we really want to link arms with all of you and to work together to make this a reality. So, we're really interested in speaking to members of the legislature, really interested in meeting with communities, helping people use the transit access map. And there's a lot more features, and there's a lot more things that you can do with it, including, for example, breaking down transit access by legislative district. And then you can go to your legislator and ask, did you know that only 2% of our people have access to transit? And we would like for you all to be on the lookout for invitation and information coming from Front and Center about how we're pushing forward these community priorities of climate justice and equity through transportation justice. So Charlie and Sierra, I think if folks have questions, we can open it up for Q&A now.
Sure, Paulo, I have a couple questions here I can share. So the first one is about Tacoma and the work on Portland Avenue. The question is whether local or any government representatives are doing anything about that area and the transportation issues there.
Am I supposed to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead, Pastor Willoughby.
I think it would be disrespectful to say that no one's doing anything. I don't think I can honestly say that no one's doing anything. People aren't doing anything. I will say that change has been slow, and we have not seen the change that is necessary for us to be family oriented in this region. But down by the casino, that's probably a half mile down the road, I've seen a great deal of change. But up here where the park and the family is, I haven't seen much change. So I would have to say not very much help.
Yeah, I think the pastor is right. The city of Tacoma has a Vision Zero policy, which is a set of policies trying to eliminate traffic fatalities. And Portland Avenue, we discovered after we launched the Portland Avenue transformation work, the city of Portland is looking at at Portland Avenue as one of its Vision Zero projects. So I think that's a good sign, but we really want to get more engaged with them. We're lucky that we have somebody who's a member of the BMAC, the BIPOC Mobility Action Coalition, who's from Tacoma, Crystal Monteros, and who is the president of the Tacoma Commission on Disabilities. So there's a lot of work to do, is the answer. But the thing that I think is I would want to stress to everybody on the call is that we should never take there is no money as an answer, because there is money. It's just either going to the wrong things or we haven't asked for it. So the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed last year has a lot of money that's coming to states that can be used for a variety of different things. Some of those are grant competitive funds, and shame on us if we don't apply for those. In fact, there is one that I think is really interesting that all front and centered member communities should think about, is a capacity building grant through USDOT that gives planning money for communities to make their transportation more safe and more just. So we have information on that, and we're happy to share with folks on the call. And we have a whole engaged group of front and centered members who are part of a working group who are working to develop ways to make sure that we have access to those dollars, and that our cities and our counties aren't saying to us, well, we can't make Portland Avenue, for example, better because there's no money.
All right, this next question is about the map. So does the map incorporate on-demand services like VIA, which seems to be an increasingly popular tool with transit agencies, and in some cases are replacing fixed route? For example, Colallam Transit replaced 2 fixed routes in Forks recently with on-demand services. In some cases, it might be an improvement, but the decrease in reliability or predictability is concerning. And I'm wondering if and how the map tool is reflecting that.
Yeah, that's a very good question. This stage of the transit work that we've been doing is entirely focused on fixed route transit. And for a good reason. Fixed route transit, like the question stated, is the most reliable. It's the way in it's frequent. Fixed route transit is the thing that generates the most freedom for most people. It is not the right answer for every place. And so I think that there is a second phase of this work that should be focused on how on-demand transit would work in the least dense areas of the state, but it doesn't show on the map, and it's not part of our transit access calculations right now.
Okay, this one is for all of the speakers. This person says, seems like in many neighborhoods described today that there is even less access for people than previously. They would be interested in comments from any of the speakers today on this, and would the work we can do together to build more access and reduce racism in our transit policy.
Vanessa, do you wanted to take that one?
Yes, definitely. Thanks for the question. There is definitely noticeably a poverty issue, even with the homeless. And it's really all about working together to build a better future, not just for me, but your children, your grandchildren. And the only way that we can do this is if we take action, move together, speak out, voice our opinion, and not just sit still and not be forgotten. And it's just very, very important that we do stand up and fight for accessible sidewalks. And government's putting so much into highways and neglecting accessible sidewalks. And some people can't even walk safely on the sidewalks because the sidewalks does not connect, or there is just not accessible, or the buses don't line up properly where they should to be able to get on the bus safely, whether you're in a wheelchair or whatever your source of getting around is. But that is a big issue that I'm completely aware of, and that definitely needs to be taken in consideration.
And yeah, thank you, Vanessa. I think I'll do a follow-up to that to tell a little story about we have done these transportation justice workshops across the state, and we did one with the Kitsap Black Student Union. And this incredible discussion was had there where the kids were saying, I don't feel safe when I have to walk in the dark and there's no sidewalk after the bus stops running at 6 p.m. I can't get to the things that I want to get to. I feel like a burden on my friends that have cars or on my parents because I can't get to the games or I can't get to practice, can't get to school. And it was really interesting because it was a multi-generational group in that room, and there were aunties and uncles there. And the aunties and uncles and the dads and moms were saying, it's funny because when I was your age, not that long ago in the 90s, I could do all of those things on the bus. And what's changed? Well, what's changed is that, about 24 years ago, Tim Eyman got this thing through the ballot measure that did away with a motor vehicle excise tax. And that removed hundreds of millions of dollars that the state used to help places like Kitsap Transit run better transit. And we have never made up for that loss. So in a way, like I heard that and this thing snapped for me. It's like, oh my God, we're not even asking for the moon. We will eventually, but we're not even asking for the stars and the moon and the sky. We're just asking for things to be as good as they were in 1996. We know that we can do this. We've done it before. And we need to do it much more. Anyways. So thank you for asking that question. It used to be much better, that you're not just imagining things.
Great. The next question is about policy. So are there specific pieces of legislation or specific local or state legislators you are working with to move these goals forward?
Well, I think that we want to start with the chairs of the Transportation Committee in both the House and the Senate. I think that to a large extent they would be they would be positive on these issues, but we're also looking for legislators who can sponsor bills that cause there to be a moratorium on highways that are hurting specific communities that have been the most overburdened with pollution, that are the highest risk for climate risk. And we're looking for also sponsors for bills that say, hey, we ought to set clear standards for how we're going to make better transit happen within a clear timeline. So it's an open call, really. So the questioner, if you know of a legislator that is very excited about taking a leadership role in transportation justice, then send them our way.
Great. All right, this next question is specific to Tacoma. This person asked, is downtown on the go in Tacoma aware of the map and making use of it?
I know the folks at Downtown on the Go, they're great, but I'm not sure that they know yet. They should, they will. We'll make sure that they do.
Yeah, I would add too, if I can, that the map and everything is just launching today. So it's early, but if you know folks there, feel free to pass it along. Our next question too is one of the most existential constraints facing transit service delivery right now is the transit operator shortage. It's the reason Pierce Transit can't deliver better service, and that's true in so many other cities. Can you talk about how the transit justice agenda supports efforts to recruit and retain transit workers?
We would love to build out that element of the transportation justice agenda more. I'm we're really aware and really concerned about the operator shortage. And, we transportation or front and centered, we participate in the National Transit Justice Call every Thursday. And that group has a piece of work where they're working with allies all across the country to go to the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, and come up with actionable steps for how can we help agencies and drivers make sure that being a bus driver, being a train operator is a really good job that you want to stick with, and how do we help agencies recruit? It's a complicated question, but it's exactly right on. It's one of the big problems in transit right now.
Great. And then this next question says, we are looking to build climate justice proposals into our collective bargaining negotiations with employers across the state. Are there specific proposals that you would suggest that we could develop to impact the issues being discussed here, ways to possibly force or engage employers to join with us as essential workers on this?
I would love to have that discussion. I think that labor has such an enormous role to play in this. So the couple of things that come to mind is it would be really powerful to have labor endorsement of the transportation justice priorities. When you're talking about actual negotiation with in terms of contracts, I would want to make sure that our friends at Disability Rights Washington have done such amazing work in terms of removing a driver's license requirement for jobs that actually don't need to have driver's licenses. There's so many job categories across the state that there's no reason why you would need to have a driver's license, and yet that's part of the job requirement, and it keeps people with disabilities and non-drivers from applying to that job. I would think about making sure that you include transit passes in your contract. I would make sure to ask about parking cash out. If the employer is giving out free parking, then at the very least, they should subsidize folks who are taking transit, or even pay them to take transit, and many, many other things. But I would love to speak to, Jacob, you have such a good question here about making the map accessible. Hey, Jacob, I haven't seen you in a few years, but I'm so happy that you're out there. We need to work on that, and we need to really make a concerted effort to make the map accessible, because it's not currently accessible. Although the map, Jacob, does have a feature, and I can show it to you if we can hop on a Zoom call at some point, where you can download a PDF or download data from a particular view of the map, and I can teach you how to do that. So that might be a workaround for now for it not being accessible.
Great. And I think we have just 2 minutes left. So this will probably be our last question. And I know there are a few we didn't get to, so we will follow up directly with those folks. But the last question is actually on accessibility, something super important. And this person asked, how are we planning to make the maps accessible to the blind?
Oh, right. I jumped in line ahead of you, Sierra, because I saw Jacob's, and I know Jacob from way back in the day. So I went ahead and answered that question. So if there's another one. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, my bad. Thank you. Okay, well, then this is our real last question. Sorry about that. Has there ever been consideration to create a documentary on the Tacoma transit difficulties so it can be brought more closely to the community? Bring think tanks to the table. Thank you.
I think you just had a great idea. Let's do it. While we're on the subject of documentaries, last year we partnered with a filmmaker who made a beautiful movie called Ramps to Nowhere about the 1960s fight in Seattle that was a joint production between Black people in the Central District and white people in Montlake who didn't want their communities bisected by a highway, and they were able to roll that highway back. And if you're as old as I am and you grew up in Seattle, you remember that over Montlake there were these ramps that stopped in the middle of the water that you can jump off of and dive into the water if you're feeling brave. That's a testament of people power can stop projects that are bad, even if they've already started. So I want to, thanks Sierra so much for managing the Q&A. And thanks everybody for attending. And please be on the lookout. Please take a look at the Washington Transit Access Map and see how we can help you in your advocacy. The URL is watransitaccessmap.org. And if you're in Tacoma, look up Pastor Willoughby. He'll be happy to give you a tour of Portland Avenue. And if you're in Kennewick, Vanessa can show you where the bus can be better. And I want to send a really warm thank you to both of them for being here today and sharing their stories and the leadership that they're taking in their communities. Thanks, everybody.